Okay, we're good. Take it away.
I'm Mary Jo Heinz, and I'm pleased to welcome you to SolveIT's second webinar for healthcare. Steve Spearman is once again our presenter, and today's topic is 10 easy steps to HIPAA compliance, protecting your data without breaking the bank. Healthcare and technology are indelibly intertwined, so SolveIT seeks to be your source for the latest and best in healthcare technology and business issues. We will have another webinar at the end of October, and are also planning a breakfast meeting with a CPA firm to cover year-end and 2013 updates. That will be a great opportunity to connect with one another in person. We'll have you fly in, Steve, for those. As you participate in the webinar, please jot down some questions so we can quiz Steve at the end. In addition, you'll receive an evaluation from Tasha so we can get your feedback. Steve is the founder and Chief Security Officer for Health Security Solutions and has been in the healthcare industry since 1991. That makes it sound like you're really old. He entered the healthcare technology industry in 1994 when he became the 22nd employee for Patient Care Technology, an innovative startup that became one of the most widely deployed electronic medical record solutions for the home care industry. Steve took on increasing responsibilities, including roles as National Sales Director of Well at Home, a telehealth solution for the management of chronic diseases in the home, followed by becoming VP of Business Development for SolveIT. Patient Care Technologies was acquired in 2007 by Meditech, a name that we're familiar with, an early partner of the company and one of the leading providers of hospital information technology solutions in the world. Steve founded Health Security Solutions in the summer of 2010 after spending more than a decade observing healthcare providers struggle with HIPAA security and privacy regulations. Health Security Solutions exists to help organizations minimize and mitigate the financial, legal, and compliance risks associated with running healthcare organizations. Security is one of the key concerns and components of the grant funding available through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Health Security Solutions provides valuable services related to ARRA grant funding and the EMR adoption. Thanks so much for doing this for us, Steve, and we're looking forward to the webinar today.
Thank you, Mary Jo, and thanks everybody for joining us on the webinar today. I had asked some participants earlier whether they were on the presentation that we gave a couple of weeks ago. We did record that presentation, and I'm going to encourage everybody to go back and review that because some of what we're going to be covering today can be clarified by going back and referencing that. In that presentation, which I believe SolveIT is going to be posting, essentially we went through these very specific elements of the HIPAA security rules, and so what we're really covering today is many of the practical steps that a clinic or hospital organization should consider going through in order to be in compliance with the rules. And so I call it 10 easy wink steps to HIPAA compliance because, you know, is there any really anything where there's 10 easy steps? It's 10 steps, and these would be a good first 10 steps to take, but in a sense the job of security is never really done. And there's, you know, there might be 10 steps, but each one of these might have multiple steps within. So. But I do think that they provide a really good broad overview of the kind of issues that you need to address if you want to be in compliance with the HIPAA regulations. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and start. And the first step that you want to, let's see here. So let me do a quick review of the steps. The first one is conduct a security risk analysis, and I'll get into that in a minute. Update, enforce policies and procedures, update your business associates agreements, assign a security officer, provide ongoing security training and awareness, create contingency plans and back up your electronic protected health information, review physical security, secure your mobile devices, create and enforce secure passwords, and implement network security. So the first step that I have is meaningful use. It is related to meaningful use. It's risk analysis. So I don't know how many of you guys are clinics, how are hospitals, or some other type of provider, but essentially, many of you are probably familiar with meaningful use, which is the method where you can get money for compliance for implementing an electronic health record. One of the things that's sort of fallen under the radar of a lot of clinics and providers is meaningful use core requirement number 15, which says conduct or review a security risk analysis per 45 CFR 164-308A1 and implement security updates as necessary. That cryptic code there in the middle is a pointer to the HIPAA security rules. And basically, meaningful use does not create a new standard by requiring risk analysis. It's just enforcing one that's been in a part of the law since the security rules were passed in 2005. And so they're just pointing to that standard. And if you go and look at the HIPAA verbiage, the verbiage says that you need to conduct an accurate and thorough assessment of the potential risks and vulnerabilities to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of electronic protected health information. So why security risk analysis? It is literally the first HIPAA security rule, the very first one. Why would they start with that? Why would they include this in the meaningful use, one of the core requirements of meaningful use? And really what they want, eligible providers and eligible hospitals and covered entities to do is to just improve their awareness, to understand what security risks they have so they can take meaningful steps to address those. So it improves the awareness. It also gives the justification for reasonable and appropriate for addressable implementation specifications. And this is one of those points where if you can go back and reference the prior presentation I give, it would be helpful. There are basically two types of safeguards in the rules. There are required safeguards, which are, just like it sounds, are required. You have to implement them. And then there are what are called addressable specifications. The addressable specs are not optional, and it's really important for me to emphasize that. They're not optional. What the rules state is that you must implement all the addressable specifications based on a standard called reasonable and appropriate. So if it's reasonable and appropriate for you to implement those standards, then you must implement those standards. And so one reason that they want people to do risk analysis is to determine whether certain those addressable safeguards are reasonable and appropriate. And I'm actually going to give you a quick example of an addressable safeguard. It's actually often thought to be required, but that's encryption. Encryption in the HIPAA rules is actually addressable, which means that you have to encrypt if it's reasonable and appropriate to do so. And when I'm beginning a risk analysis for one of my clients, when I'm dealing with this, the way that we figure out whether we do it is kind of complicated. It's like, how's is the data being stored and cached locally on the machine, things like that. And this would come out of the risk analysis and determine what's reasonable and appropriate. So, so those are the types of, that's one important reason that we do risk analysis. Another thing is that it helps identify the borders or boundaries of your systems where PHI, protected health information, exists. Where is it coming into the organization? How is it going out of the organization? How is it being created, processed, transferred, stored within the organization, all of which help you understand kind of the steps you need to do to make it more secure. Gives you an improved basis for decision making. The rules would not expect you to, there's nothing in the rules that would expect you to spend $1,000 to fix a $100 risk. And then it also helps determine the types of access levels, particularly in large organizations or especially hospitals where there might be 8 to 10 core systems, financials, labs, electronic health records, CPOE, all these things. How you would give, what the types of access you give to different types of employees can help be defined by the risk analysis process. So that leads to the question, how do you conduct a security risk analysis? And I had this analogy that I was using a few months ago that I've had to change, but I still like it a lot. I say the rules themselves don't actually say. It just says what I just read to you a minute ago in the HIPAA rules. It says you have to conduct a risk analysis, which means understand, risks to PHI, to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of ePHI. We have some clues from the footnotes of the regulations, which all tend to point to NIST documents. And what I like to say is that somewhere between writing "I'm okay" on the back of a napkin, which we're pretty certain an auditor would not accept, and in a 10,000-page report, which an auditor might accept but also might really be annoyed by it, somewhere between there is a document that an auditor would say, yeah, this works, this is a real risk analysis. And our best guidelines recently, still our best guidelines and really our only guidelines until recently was the SP 800-30 document, Risk Management Guide for Information Systems. I do want you to know that this document is being re-released by the NIST. It's in a draft format right now, and its new name is Guidance on Risk Assessment. The Risk Management Guide for Information Systems is now 800-39. So they've made the purpose of that document even more specific. It's a guidance on risk assessment. And then another great guide for healthcare is 800-66, Resource Guide for Implementing HIPAA. So those are kind of all we had to work from for a long time, and they provide an excellent source of guidance on how we do this. And I use an NIST. The process that I use for risk analysis is an NIST process. But we do have some more clues now. One is that in June of 2012, the CMS published its audit protocol, which you can go view if you want to just Google HIPAA audit protocol, CMS or something. I can send this out to everybody when we're done. But it actually provides guidance on if you were audited, what would an auditor want to see on your, what would he want to look for? And that audit protocol gives us, it's not about risk analysis, but it basically provides guidance on what that auditor would need, including risk analysis. So it's a good way to go. The other big development was in April, the Office of the National Coordinator published the Guide to the Privacy and Security of Health Information Technology. If you read this document, which is about 44 pages long, it clearly was meant to help provide guidance around the meaningful use requirement of core requirement number 15, and clearly had as one of its major goals to clarify what is required for risk analysis. And in fact, on page 11 of that guide is a table called Myths and Facts Regarding Risk Analysis. And this is not lifted from that. This is my own kind of taking their verbiage and putting it on my own table. The actual table on that guide actually has about 12 items on it. But I've taken some of the key, quote, myths about risk analysis that they've debunked, and I've put them into this table. So here's some of the myths. One, it is not optional for small providers. Well, that's not the myth. The myth is that it's optional for small providers. And the fact is that it's not all eligible providers have to do a risk analysis. Another myth is installing a certified EHR is enough, and they clarify, no, the risk analysis must look at all systems that contain ePHI. My EHR vendor is handling this, another myth. No eligible providers are solely responsible for the risk analysis. I do want to say that this is one that I have run into a lot, and it's one of those cases that, if you hang this up and you call your vendor and saying, hey, they're saying that you don't do risk analysis, and they push back, my real answer is you need to get them to show the risk analysis they did for you, or if you're going to have them do one for you, show you one that they've done for another provider. It's unfortunate, but my experience is that a lot of EHR vendors have provided very poor guidance to a lot of eligible providers, especially on the core requirement number 15. So just make sure that you're getting a proper risk analysis done. Another one is that a checklist will suffice. I've got many HIPAA checklists, and they are useful, but they are not a risk analysis. Another one is only needs to look at the electronic health record. And no, that's not the case. All IT assets that process, store, access EPHI need to be included. Now, the last myth that I have is that you have to outsource it, and that's in fact not the case. You can do a risk analysis using your own internal resources, but even in the table, that myth, it ends by saying this is the kind of thing that often you can benefit by doing it outside, using outside resources. And in fact, on page 17 and elsewhere, the document assumes that you're going to hire somebody. It's sort of, they equate it to being similar to hiring an attorney or an accountant. It's generally something that requires expertise that eligible providers do not have. So what are the elements? You want to determine the scope. That means really, that's things like an IT asset inventory where you really understand where things, what are you going to be doing and to what are you going to be doing it to. So determining, the scope of the enterprise, collect data, and that's everything from interviews to computer scans possibly to assessing things like current policies. And from that, you determine what the current security measures are in place. And then you go on and identify and document potential threats and vulnerabilities. And in the NIST methodology, they use something called vulnerability pairings. That's what number 5 and 6 talk about. And I'm going to go to the next slide and then come back to this one. Basically, the goal of risk analysis is to not fix all risks at once. In fact, that's really not possible because there are always more risks that could be fixed. And security is an iterative process. So you're always working on it. But you do want to be able to understand what your biggest concerns are. And one way that you can do that, the methodology recommended by NIST, is to determine the risks that have a high potential impact and a high likelihood to occur. So, so if you've got something that's likely to occur, but if it happens, it's not that big a deal. That's in this quadrant. Not saying we ignore that or don't care about that, but it's not going to probably be our top priority. Same is true. What if the impact is really high if it happens, but it's just not likely to occur? Well, then again, not to ignore it, but it's just not something that should be our first priority. This is where our first priority should be, is those vulnerabilities that are likely to occur and that are likely to occur and that could have a big potential impact. I will tell you that when I'm doing risk analysis, I'm really concerned about finding vulnerabilities where a lot of records could be stolen at once. So like use of laptops and mobile devices, which we'll get to in a minute, is always a concern. 80% of the reported breaches involve the theft of mobile devices. So. Then you want to document you determine the level of risk, you rank them based on the vulnerability pairings, and then you document the results. And then you review and update it as needed. So that's basically an overview of risk analysis. I do want everybody, if you'll indulge me a moment, this is a big part of what I do in my consultancy is risk analysis, and I've developed a streamlined and structured approach to risk analysis called Risk Analysis in a Box that could be beneficial to many of you. And so I would recommend if any of you want to talk further about risk analysis, I'd be glad to do that. The second thing you need to do is update and enforce policies and procedures. Overwhelmingly, when I'm helping clients out and I'm doing risk analysis, it is overwhelmingly the case, probably in 75 to 80% of the time, that the single biggest vulnerability that they have is a compliance vulnerability related to policies and procedures, either in most cases, just totally missing needed policies and procedures, or just needed, policies that are just very inadequate, very out of date, things like that. And if you haven't done that recently, this is a good time to work. And I will tell you that my experience, especially with eligible providers, is that they tend to have privacy policies, but often they literally will have no security policies. And if you go look at the webinar that I did previously, I actually go through all the regulations, and then I'll help you give you a clue, and I'm going to talk about them in a second. But there's a lot of changes that technologically over the last few years, as well as regulatory changes that that make it worth doing. I want to say that although not perfect, policies provide cover in the event of a compliance issue. So, for example, if you had a breach, if you don't have policies, then you literally are left speechless in front of that, administrative law judge or in front of that auditor. But if you have a breach and you have policies, you can always say, well, he violated or she violated our policies. Now that's not a, cure-all, but it helps. But not having policies is just not good. It's a very good way to get in trouble very quickly. So what are some of the policies that you should have? These are the ones that are pretty explicit and required under the HIPAA rules. You need an information system activity review procedure. You need sanction policies, security incident procedures. You need a data backup plan, and emergency mode operation plan. Keep in mind that these are all required safeguards under the rules. None of these are addressable. You need a document retention policy, you need a workstation use policy, a workstation security policy, a device immediate disposal policy, media reuse, unique user ID, emergency access procedures, audit controls, data integrity policies, and authentication policies. And so, by the way, just to lighten things up, I love this Dilbert cartoon. I have a new hobby. It's called phishing. I send fake banking emails to gullible executives. Then I find out their financial information and use it to steal the money they don't deserve. Dear customer, this is your bank. We forgot your social security number and password. Why don't you send them to us so we can protect your money? Sincerely, Adi Banker. Looks legit. So people want to basically, you want to have the things in place that you need, from a policy standpoint. I want to go out and point one special policy. That's one this right here. It's the sanction policy. The sanction policy is the policy that says this is what happens to you if you violate the rules. And I've had more than once I've had people say, oh, we have a zero tolerance policy around HIPAA, around HIPAA compliance. To which I say, I'm a big fan of zero tolerance as long as it's a good policy. But a good policy is progressive. It allows for punishments all the way that would start at like verbal reprimand is, hey, you really can't post your password on your laptop like that, to we're calling the sheriff because you're going to jail because you committed fraud. And so you should have progressive disciplines in your sanction policy that recognize that people are human. You don't want to have to fire good people because they made a good person because they made a mistake. But I'm a big fan of zero tolerance of a good policy, and that should include elements that are where you have progressive sanctions. So you want to integrate these into the workflow. I've already said that in a way, having policies is great, have them on your shelf, but really you want to integrate them into your practice. So I'm a big fan of the use of checklists to do that. Onboard checklists for new employees, doing quarterly checklists, things like that. And then deploy and set up technologies to reinforce your policies. So as a good example of that, your access control policy might have a password element that talks about what's required, password policies, or that your policy might say we require everybody to auto log off. Well, you can use Active Directory to reinforce your policies. So that's another good action step. The next thing is you need to update your business associates agreements. Let me very quickly describe what a business associate is. A business associate is an organization or vendor that provides services for an eligible, for a covered entity that is not providing direct patient care, or for whom the contract is not one in which they're providing direct patient care. And so these are people that need to see data, they need to see PHI, but they're not providing direct care. Those need to be covered under a business associates agreement. And so an example of that would be, for example, a company that does transcription, billing services. Lots of companies that do like quality consulting need you to send them, PHI in the form of reports. Pretty much anything like that. Who is not a business associate? Your maintenance and housekeeping vendors are not business associates. They should be signing some agreement that talks about their requirement related to protecting the confidentiality of PHI, but they're not business associates. And if you have clients that are business associates, or if you are a business associate, you should know that under the rules since high-tech, that business associates are treated just like covered entities. They have to comply with all the HIPAA rules. The criminal and civil liability rules apply. They have to notify covered entities if they have a breach. They have to do an accounting of disclosures. In other words, business associates now under the rules are treated just like covered entities, and they have to safeguard protected health information in the same manner. So one of the options for this for both business associates and policies is I sell a compliance library. I also do policy reviews for organizations as well. And one option is this compliance library. It provides an excellent pardon me, I'm having some technical difficulties here. Just a second. Can everybody hear? Is anybody having problems hearing me? Everybody can hear me? Okay. So this compliance library, if you're interested in talking to me about policies, just give me a call. I'll be glad to help you any way that I can. So, okay. Next is you want to assign a security officer. The rules require that every covered entity has to have a named security officer. Must be a named individual, cannot be a department, cannot be a committee, has to be a named individual. The rules don't specify any credentials, and you can understand why. I mean, for a small clinic, requiring somebody to hire a master's in information technology would be way overkill. It can be shared with the privacy officer, and in smaller organizations often is. I do recommend that in larger organizations and even in medium-sized organizations that they should be separate, because their job descriptions and roles tend to be different. It's generally more technical. So in hospitals, as an example, the director of IT is often the security officer and is usually not the privacy officer. So some of the duties and responsibilities, one of the things, by the way, if you go and look at that, the audit protocol I mentioned earlier, when they get to this kind of requirement, they want to see a job description. So it's good to have a job description under this that would look at things like protect the confidentiality, integrity of PHI, maybe a member or chair of a HIPAA steering committee provides guidance on security policies and procedures, planning and leadership, enforcement of policies and procedures, monitor operations for security compliance, coordination of security training, internal auditing of data integrity and access, manage receipt of reports of security breaches and take actions to minimize the harm and recommend corrective action, maintain awareness of changes in security risks, security measures, and computer systems. So develop a job description, provide training and education, technical and non-technical, to that security officer, know what the requirements are, and give appropriate level of authority consistent with the job description. And this last one's important. Consider outsourcing this role. I'm actually right now working with SolveIT, and hopefully over the next few weeks and months, I want to help SolveIT so that they can more proactively help their clients manage their HIPAA compliance and security, which I think over time will lead to them being able to actually have the role of security, take on the role of security officer. So nothing's finalized, but this is something that, for for a lot of organizations, it would make sense to outsource. Provide ongoing security training awareness, which is one of the HIPAA standards. So it says implement security awareness training program for all members of its workforce, including management. It is a standard. It should be driven by your policies. So do your employees know your requirements? Do they know your sanction policies? You know, consider doing a needs assessment of your training program, particularly for larger organizations. And what I basically tell people is that you want every employee to be literate in security basics. You want them to know just the basics. They don't have to know how to, you know, edit the registry tables in Windows, but they need to be literate so that they understand that just because that person sounds friendly and convincing and knows your Aunt Janet doesn't mean you should give them your password. And so that's an example of that security training and awareness is in many ways is often the only kind of thing standing between you and a breach when it comes to social engineering, people convincing other people to give up information they shouldn't give up. So it's really important. The actual standard is required, but there are specific implementation specs that are addressable, such as refresher training and other things like that. So what I tell people is that treat it like it's required. There's a high cost benefit to training. It's relatively inexpensive to implement, and people are often the weak link in the security chain. So most breaches occur to one degree or another, have an element of human error. So what are an example of security reminders? Printed notices, posters, in-services on HIPAA security, formal retraining on policies and procedures. You should require periodic retraining. This is an example of a security awareness poster that I've developed. You can get it on my website if you go click on resources. And there's actually a page on my website called, it's the same thing, 10 Steps to HIPAA Compliance, and one of those will lead to a link that has resources, including these posters. Or if you want to send me an email, that would be fine too. But this is an example of a security awareness tool. Just get people to think about their security. So the required topics, or the topics that are in the rules that are addressable, are protection from malicious software, things like dealing with avoiding viruses, Trojans, password management, safeguarding complexity, expiration, login monitoring, knowing what happens when you try too many times to log in, things like this. There's other topics that you may want to consider. This is going to go out to you. You can look at these later. Things like patching and shoulder surfing, social engineering, that's really important because that's one way that a lot of hacks happen. And then look at other organizations, maybe like local trade groups, or maybe the regional extensions in your area might have this. But a lot of states actually have healthcare associations or organizations whose sole responsibility or focus is training. So in my state, for example, South Carolina, AHEC is an example of that. It's a consortium of healthcare organizations that provide training resources and tools. When you have training, make sure you document participation, because if you don't document participation, it doesn't ever happen. It didn't happen. And it's not implausible that an auditor would, even if you have a good training policy, they'd say, well, what evidence do you have that you provided training, and that the employee should have known different? So I think it's appropriate to test for mastery and retrain and retest every so often. Create contingency plans and backup EPHI. So the verbiage says exact reproducible copies of the EPHI. And this basically has the goal of having, access for saving data that's not lost. I actually am just wrapping up a 16 clinic risk analysis, and when I was on site with one of those clinics, she gave me a story about how her hard drive stopped working, and she had to, she couldn't send it out because it had PHI on it. The main point that that came to my mind when she told the story is, you wouldn't have had all these heartaches if you just backed up your your PHI. So I like this cartoon. The hard drive crashed. What do I do? Did you back up? And he said, no. Why is it going to blow? But you do need to be backing up your data. Things like cost, portability, convenience, what's the maximum allowable downtime, security of whatever that solution is, the frequency of backups, daily, continue. There's forms of backup that are literally continuous. It's like we use mirror drives or clustering or things like that. And then know your recovery priorities. So especially for a large organization, you want to bring up your systems up according to importance. And I will say that SolveIT, this would be a good topic to talk to SolveIT about, because they can definitely help you with backup and backup considerations as it relates to PHI. The most common methods are tape, hard disk, and remote backup. Tape is still very common. It's very old technology. It's very inexpensive to store, but inexpensive to store, but quite expensive to restore. And I don't like tape, but it does have some benefits. It's been around for a long time. Hard disk is another thing, an external hard drive or a hard drive or a hard drive slot that you can do. That can be good, but you have the disadvantage of needing to be able to, as you do a tape, of needing to take that off-site, and that can present its own set of security risks. I do tell everybody, and I mean everybody, if you're listening today and you use tape or hard disk to do backup, please check today to make sure that it's encrypted. A lost, backup hard drive that's unencrypted is just a really bad year for you, at least a bad month. And so just if you're using, some form where you're having to physically take off the backup off-site, make sure that it's encrypted. And there are different models. You can do full backup. You always do that initially, and then most will do an incremental backup from that time point and then do a full backup once a month. So there's also an option called bare metal recovery, which is a way that you can get your systems back up very quickly. Review physical security. It's surprising how this kind of often gets ignored, but it's something that's really worth doing. Just looking at your locks and doors. This risk analysis that I just conducted, it's 14 clinics, and about half of them had alarm systems. And I'm not saying it's required, but alarms are cheap and effective, and at least you can know who's going into your property. Maybe they're employees that have a key and don't like you anymore, and you don't even know that yet. And an alarm at least lets you know who's coming on and off. And then depending on the size, and you may even want to upgrade that to something like cameras and other things. But other things to consider are workstation position. So how is your workstations, are they facing out to where patients can see them? That's considered. In workstation security are things like how is your workstation used physically in the real world? So it's worth having good policies around workstation security, like passwords and auto log off and things like that. Where are servers located? This is one that, again, is for a lot of clinics especially. Servers are often in a closet, and that's fine. That's really common. But usually there's no physical security for that server. And one of the disadvantages of a server is that they are never encrypted. Even though they might use encrypted folders or files, they never use full disk encryption, and a stolen server would be not good. Physical security of your server is important and worth looking at. Use lock restricted closets and racks when appropriate for your server. Secure your mobile devices. Excuse me, I'm going to get some water here. So here's the young IT guy making fun of Gilbert. Are you getting a lot done on the grandpa box? The what? The people of my generation do our work on phones and tablets. Oh, I also have a laptop. I'll text the 90s and let them know. So mobile devices and their security is become and is just a huge issue in healthcare. Lots of physicians in both clinic and hospital setting have sort of demanded use of things like iPads, other tablet devices. Of course, laptops have been a big deal for a long time and continue to be a big part of how we're accessing our electronic health records. So make sure they're secure. Authentication, you need to have a password. They need to be a good password. That's where you start. But that's really not enough. You want to look at things like encryption, even though it's addressable. If you have laptops or other devices where data is being cached or stored locally, then you need to really seriously look at encrypting those devices. As I said earlier, 80% of the breaches that are reported on the CMS website are related to loss of mobile devices. So you want to think about, where are your mobile devices? Are they being taken off-site? Excuse me. Are they being taken off-site, and how is it being secured if so? So these are some of the things that you want to ask. What devices contain PHI? What's being accessed? How about email? If you use email to process and to communicate with patients and other doctors, those emails contain PHI, and you get PHI, you get your email on your phone, then that is something that needs to be included in your inventory for risk analysis, because that's a vulnerability. Is ePHI being cached locally? How is it accessed? What's the quantity of data and records that is available? How mobile are they? Are they being used all the time? Don't forget USB devices. Theft and loss of mobile devices is actually underreported. So you want to look at things like your policies, restrictions on use of personal devices, training, maintain physical control of your mobile devices at all times. Manage the deployment and configuration. So require complex passwords. Use domain, Active Directory, and other domain management tools to require or log off complex passwords. Make sure those devices stay patched. If you're using classes of devices like iPads, you activate the remote wipe and deactivation capabilities that's tied to putting in a correct password. Back up your data, and it's often appropriate to use full disk encryption on your mobile devices. I'll say lastly too, I'm a big fan of virtualization, using things like virtualization and remote desktop on mobile devices, because no data is being stored locally. It's actually a really good, secure way to use mobile devices. The downside being, of course, that you can't use the system unless you have a network connection. But in today's day and age, that's less of an issue than it used to be. This may seem so simple, but create and enforce secure passwords. I love this one. You will no longer have access to code on any server but your own. And she says, is it my imagination, or are all of our rules designed for the sole purpose of being huge inconveniences? And starting today, all passwords must contain letters, numbers, doodles, sign language, and squirrel noises. It's really interesting how, it's very interesting to me how, of all the issues that I deal with all the time, when it comes to physicians, passwords is actually one of the biggest deals. They don't like auto log off. They don't like having to put passwords in. They don't like having complex passwords. And there are ways to kind of help make it better that are related to training. But your passwords really should, your password policies, you should say you can't use personal information such as names or phone numbers. I have to tell you guys this story. Just making fun of one of my doctor friends who I was helping out with his practice. And he gave me the same thing, how, AIDS passwords and having to log in, yada, yada, yada. And so I was doing the risk analysis, and his laptop had a sticky note on the laptop with the username and password, which is bad enough. But what was even more humorous to me is that his password was 12345, which is like, why did you need to stick a sticky note on that? I can remember that. So, and one reason I can remember it is because it's a sequence of numbers or letters, which you should never do. Also, you should never use words, even backwards, abbreviated, or intentionally misspelled, because there's a kind of hack called a dictionary hack that they can use. And so what you should do is you should change passwords periodically. I don't say how periodically because it depends on the organization. And I'd say a minimum of every 6 months, but you have to do what's best consistent with kind of workflow and operational efficiency, things like that. But do change your passwords periodically. Use at least 8 characters. Use a combination of upper lowercase numbers and symbols. It doesn't have to be all 4. In fact, it shouldn't require all 4. That's too restrictive. But it should require at least 2 and maybe 3 of those. And then use your systems to require and enforce those. So here's Dogbert's password recovery service for morons. I done forgot my password. What's your name? My name is Ned, I think. Is your password Ned? Sweet baby jeepers, you're like some sort of Nostradamus. Here's a brochure for my cult. One of the things that I'm going to teach everybody right now, a little trick on how to create complex but memorable passwords. And I'll also point out that I have a video of how to do this. It's a very stupid video that I made, but it actually has good information on it that is on my website. It's also on that resources page I talked to you about earlier. But it teaches this methodology. Come up with a memorable phrase, such as, my dog Gypsy loves to jump into my bed. Take the first letter of that phrase, the first letter of each word in the phrase, and notice how the Gypsy is a personal pronoun, so it's, is that right? Personal pronoun. Anyway, it's capitalized, and it's also capitalized in the password. Take the first letter and put them together into a password, and then put an exclamation. That's a symbol. It's easy to remember. And then if you can substitute a couple of numbers for, like, for example, if you look, my dog loves to jump into my bed. So you could actually put in a 2 there, or maybe use a 1 instead of an I. But that's a very good password, and if you teach people this method, it actually is pretty effective. They take some practice, and they have to think a little bit about it, but it's actually a really good password that's pretty easy to remember. Lastly, you want to secure your network, and I will say that partnering with a good company like SolveIT can really help with these kinds of things, but this is where you want to do what's necessary to make sure that you don't get hacked and minimize the vulnerabilities on your network. Things like firewalls, patching, antivirus, vulnerability scanning, intrusion detection, web content filtering, data loss prevention, and email security. Firewalls, make sure you got those set up on your system. I'm going to go through that when patching. Keep your machines patched. Make sure your antivirus dictionaries are up to date. This could be a big vulnerability. I don't know if any of you heard, but Internet Explorer had a huge patch that was just found, and they actually released an emergency patch for it just last week. And so keep your systems up to date, including your antivirus. Intrusion detection prevention. A lot of times this can be one of the things, a portion of what your firewall can do, but can help you, notify you if there's someone trying to get into your systems. And then periodically even doing vulnerability scans to know what the vulnerabilities are on your network. Web content filtering. So if you have a unified threat management system that's your firewall, which most organizations do, then deploy web content filtering. You want to keep people off dangerous websites. You want to keep your staff from doing dangerous things like BitTorrenting and going on to dangerous, engaging in dangerous activities. So use things like web content filtering to help do that. Email security is something that you have to look at it kind of all around. But if you're using email to process PHI, then you need to seriously consider encryption. And one of the things that's a new initiative with the Meaningful Use Stage 2 is moving towards patient portals. And I don't know if y'all have kept up with the final rules, but there's actually a rule about the use of patient portals, and 5% of your patients will have to access a patient portal in order to be eligible for Stage 2 funding. And so use of patient portals is being encouraged and might be a good alternative to email. But if you are using email for PHI, you need to make sure that it's properly protected. So closing thoughts are, integrate these things into your practices. Automate as much as you can at the application level, at the domain level. Understand the vendor's roles. I want to sort of say something on behalf of IT vendors everywhere. I go into clinics all the time where the clinics were making assumptions about the role that the vendor had as it pertained to HIPAA compliance. But those assumptions had never been articulated into any sort of service level agreement or contract. It was just like, well, I assume my IT vendor was handling it. But remember that you're responsible for HIPAA, and if you want to outsource some or a great portion of that responsibility to a third party like SolveIT, just make sure that you do it in an agreement and not just sort of make assumptions about it. And so that's actually one reason that SolveIT that I talked to Garrett and others there about is let's make sure that you're clarifying the proper roles here. So automate as much as possible, use Active Directory, define the vendor's roles, create and use checklists, and then consider outsourcing when appropriate. And with that, I want to just open it up to questions. Any questions at all? Anybody still there? Okay, I don't think there are any questions. So thank you all for participating today. I want to give everybody, if you want to get out a piece of paper, let me give you my email address. It's sspearman, that's SS, Sierra, Sierra, PEARMAN, at healthsecuritysolutions.com, or you can just contact SolveIT and they can get you in touch with me. If you want to send me an email with any additional questions, comments, concerns, I am very available to you. So please feel free to contact me, and I'd love to be of assistance to you in any way that I can. So thank you for joining us today, and look forward to being of service to you in the future.
Thanks, Jack.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.